Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here outside the Robco Sales and Service Centre. I apologise if you hear any stomping in the background. We're quite close to the airport and Liberty Prime is stomping about. And we're here to talk about one of, to my mind, the most interesting robots that appear in the Fallout games, which is the Robobrains. So the question we're answering is, why reinvent the wheel? Because, people often compare the human brain to a kind of computer. Instead of using, a AI of some kind of programming, they decided, why don't we just use the human brain? So the Robobrain was developed by General Atomics International, with some involvement from both Robco and the United States Army Robotics Division. So, yeah, this is them selling terminals, I believe. And the project was led by Dr. Bert Riggs, who ended up actually having his own brain put into a Robobrain at some point. So you can meet him in Vault 118, which is over in Far Harbour. And it was a very top secret project. So I say we're inside the Robco Sales and Service Centre, so obviously a place for, them selling various products of Robco, as well as, repair centres and things like that. So this is obviously a place where technicians would be, repairing things. And that kind of thing, but obviously hidden in here we've got the Mechanist's lair, and the Mechanist didn't just build this was kind of found. So even the soldiers that kind of ran security on this project weren't fully aware of exactly what was happening down here. We've got all these doors and things like that, and then we've got this guy here as you kind of make your way down into the place. And the research kind of took place in other parts as well, so some military facilities elsewhere in the country, like the Sierra Army Depot that you visit in Fallout 2, but the main research facility was here in Boston at this place, which was called the USA Robotics Technology Facility, RB2851, which obviously hidden underneath this Robco Sales and Service Centre. And the reason for the secrecy, as you can imagine, is because the main CPU for these robots is the human brain. Specifically the human brain, that wrinkly blob of jelly that controls everything in your body and all your thoughts. So no AI can truly match the processing power of grey matter, so it's clearly the ideal choice for a robot, right? Well, I guess we'll see. So, yeah, you can see there's a lot of stuff going on in here. Now, is this? Yeah, this is the terminal, production control terminal, so we're going to need that later. So, this is the sort of facility where the robots were produced. There's lots of, protectrons and things, so quite high levels of security in this place, understandably. So the brains were extracted carefully in this room here. Brain extraction, does what it says. So they had this machine, which is completely broken, that would extract the brain and put it into biomedical gel that preserves the function in the tissue and presumably provides the necessary nutrients for the brain to continue to function. Because once the brain is cut off from oxygen and nutrients like glucose, worth remembering that your brain uses like 20% of your total calories every single day in the form of glucose, unlike other parts of the body that can use other things to create energy from. The brain must have glucose, which is why if someone has low blood sugar, low blood glucose, they can start to have neurological symptoms like seizures and go into a coma. So glucose is very important. The brain needs it, so this gel has to provide all of that, because if the brain's separated from that, it starts to deteriorate and sustain damage within a couple of minutes. You know, it's 4 minutes without oxygen before the brain starts to take damage. So the gel protects the brain from this. And then suitable brains that were extracted were then placed in a chassis. So they were put into like a dome thing that was mounted on a chassis that had a cylindrical design. So it was kind of round, barrel-shaped body essentially. They did also attach them to other things, unfortunately. That's the elevator here. So they put them on these gurneys, which is very strange, but here we are. So the chassis of the Robobrains is heavily armoured to protect all the internal systems. They run on a pair of tracks, which gives them mobility and the capability to handle rough terrain and maintain their centre of gravity, so they're not easy to knock over or tip over. Like, you know, the Protectrons, you hit them and they can fall over, but the Robobrains, that doesn't happen quite so easily. And then they have a pair of arms that are very flexible, and they have manipulators on the end that have kind of opposed claws. And this allows for really quite precise motor control, which is something obviously that humans are generally capable of. You know, with our hands, we can do a lot of things that other species can't because of our opposable thumbs and the control that we have over our hands. So it does mean that Robobrains are actually capable of handling weapons that were meant for human hands, like assault rifles, but some of the models do also have built-in lasers into their hands as well. And the glass dome that protects the brain it's generally quite tough. So, you know, it's obviously kind of reinforced glass. It's not something that's going to break easily, but if it is damaged, then it does have an impact on the function of the brain. There's also optical sensors, infrared sensors, tracking functions, audio receptors, and even voice modules that are included in the body of these robots. Most models do have the built-in laser weapons, but they also have mesmetrons. So we'll get back to that when we talk about kind of combat capabilities with these robots. But first, we need to talk about the brains, because holy carp, is this a wild ride. The human brain does have a phenomenal ability to process information and to store memories, but they don't just sell them at the local super duper mart. So where are they getting these brains? The original first trials for the Robobrain were done using primate brains, specifically chimpanzees, which is an interesting choice. I would have thought that, you know, they would have started with something a bit more simple, like mice brains or something, just for, you know, proof of concept kind of a thing. But no, apparently we went to chimpanzees and then straight to humans. And chimpanzees they're quite a good human analogue. You know, we have a lot of kind of things in common with that species. Kind of makes sense. But human brains were definitely superior. So they used, you know, criminals, convicted criminals and prisoners, because of course they did. Why not? I mean, who would volunteer for something like this? You know, they need the brains to be as fresh as possible. And I mean as fresh as possible, so they have to be extracted while the subject is still alive. That's kind of a non-negotiable really in the situation. They can't be taken from people that die of natural causes or even people that have been executed, because you really only have a couple of minutes to get the brain into the gel before it becomes useless. So, you know, it's very, very important that they take these brains from, you know, the living. They can't just dig up bodies and things, because I say the brain deteriorates so rapidly after death that you just don't have a lot of wiggle room with it. Okay, I had to have a little bit of a hunt around to find the terminal I wanted to look at. This place is a bit of a maze. So we're actually in the kind of observation level above the sort of cells where the test subjects were kept. So there's a terminal here that gives us some details, and there's also a little Protectron model there, that's cute. So this is the medical observation terminal, and it's got a list of some of the subjects that we were talking about. So they had to be assessed for suitability after all, and they're all convicted murderers, serial killers, arsonists, that kind of thing, but they do make note of things that might affect their suitability. So subject A22, 34-year-old male, serial killer in the DC area, not to be visited alone, security personnel required for all interviews. So this guy was obviously considered pretty dangerous. So higher brain function but weak constitution, so high protein diet and electrotherapy to treat his muscles until his brain survival rate for the procedure is no longer at risk. So his brain was good, but his body wasn't, so they wanted to build him up so that he would be strong enough to handle having his brain extracted, because, you know, that's what we're talking about here. If we look at A53, so this one is a 48-year-old woman who was convicted for arson, burnt down a courthouse, leaving 3 dead, but she has to be sedated for people to get close. However, she does have a medical history of dementia, which means that they're worried about her brain health declining or affecting their data in some way, so she wasn't going to be a suitable candidate to have her brain extracted. And then the next two, A57, is a 22-year-old woman who murdered a waitress and is violent and has to be restrained and sedated. Very emotional, on a cocktail of antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. And they're going to look at psychiatric sessions to see if she's going to be a good candidate. So they don't really seem to be that fussed that people that are violent and, you know, aggressive, that seems to be fine by them, but they're worried about potential mental health issues that could have an impact. And same for A72. It's a 32-year-old man, second-degree murder under the influence, high intelligence and knowledge of tactics, but signs of PTSD. So again, we're looking at evaluating for treatment for mental health disorders, and it is something that makes sense. So mental health issues like PTSD, like depression, could impact the suitability of the brains, because despite what some people believe, mental health problems do literally change the physiology and even the structure of your brain. It's well documented through, you know, functional MRIs and all sorts of things that having mental health problems physically affects your brain and the way your brain works. It affects the neuron connections, it affects the neurotransmitters. So it might all be in your head, but there's detectable changes in the brains of people that suffer from mental health disorders. It does affect it, and that's what makes it a real illness. So it's all in your head because that's where your brain is. You know, so it is something that kind of makes sense that they would be wary of using the brains of people that have mental health disorders because they might not work as intended, which is interesting. And then this final one has the wrong designation, but it's a 33-year-old woman who's ex-military, convicted of second-degree manslaughter, highly intelligent and proved to be mentally sound. Question mark there. Approved for candidacy. So, you know, that's they don't care about the fact that these people were, you know, violent and killed people and things like that, but they only cared about if the brain was healthy enough and if the body was healthy enough. So now we need to head back down to the other end. So yeah, this is where they were all kept. So they just had their own little prison with these Robobrain gurneys, which is just creepy as heck. Some of the people did become ghouls as well. So, you know, all highly unpleasant. Forfeiture, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Anyway, going back through here. Like I said, this place is an absolute maze. It really is. But it's kind of cool. Here we go, so we're back to the research wing, so we've got more brains floating in jars. Incinerator, because obviously you need to get rid of what's left once you've taken the bits you need. And we're going to go back through here to the brain extraction section. So we're now looking for the, what's it called? Cerebral reconditioning terminal, because I think these two terminals that are in this area are actually in the wrong place. They probably should have been switched. However, this one is very, very interesting. These are transcripts of recordings where they, once they'd extracted the brain and they put it in a voice modulator to assess if the brain was as it should be for their purposes. So they would flush out the long and short-term memories to remove the personality and the memories of the previous life, so that you're starting kind of like resetting to factory settings, if you will. So A22, so they make note that there was no damage during extraction and the details of the person, and then there's a conversation between the doctor and the brain. So you can see from this transcript that A22 is freaking out because they can't see, or he can't see, what have you done to me, what's going on, I can't feel anything, I can't feel my body. And then the doctor's like, well, if you don't calm down, we're going to turn you off. And he's like, what do you mean you kill me, what have you done to me? So absolute panic. Too unstable is the term used. But you know, they're freaking out because they're not aware of their body anymore, and it's something that, you know, you might not consciously think that you're aware of your body, but your brain is constantly getting sensory input and signals from every part of your body. It's the control centre, so it does have, you know, not just the 5 senses that everybody knows, but there are other senses like, you know, temperature sensing, proprioception, which is the sense of where your limbs are in relation to your body, so that, you know, if you raise your arm, you know you've raised your arm, and your brain knows that as well. It affects your sense of balance and stability. You know, your body sensing your blood pressure and monitoring that, all sorts of things. But your brain is constantly getting information about what's happening in your body, so you might not be consciously aware of it, but you're thinking about, you know, your brain's aware of it all the time. So if you suddenly were conscious but lost all of that sensory input and couldn't feel your legs, couldn't see, couldn't hear, it would be very disorientating, it would be very distressing, and that's kind of what's happened here, because they've just suddenly lost all of that sensory input that the brain uses to keep things running the way they should. So it's not out of the question to panic about that. And then I think this next one was A57, which was the one that was potentially a family history of dementia. And there was possible frontal lobe damage on extraction, so they give the unit designation and then initiate command diagnostic zeta, and nothing happens. No command was provided and awaiting unit designation. So short-term memory is damaged, which means that basically the inputs aren't retained and the brain just keeps resetting, which obviously doesn't suit them, so it's burnt, because who cares, right? You know, that's kind of an interesting one. And then the next one is one that we haven't really heard about, I don't think. So it's A110, successful, no damage. And basically this one's been reported to be acting irregularly, and they find a fragment, and then again my arms and my legs are gone, what's wrong, freaking out. So basically there was a bit of memory left behind in the temporal lobe, so they need to get it cleared out and tell them to stop being sloppy about it. So basically the technicians that cleared out the memories weren't doing the job properly. And then we get on to the final transcript here, which is a very interesting one. This is subject A124, successful extraction, 36-year-old male. Started recording, repeat that again. I said that if you don't put me back in my body, I'm going to kill you, then everyone else in this place. And the doctor's like, you know that you're just a brain in a jar, and you can't do anything. And he's like, I don't care, I'll find a way. And this is perfect. The doctor asks, the lack of your original body doesn't disturb you? And he's like, no, it doesn't matter. Whatever it takes, I'll kill all of you. So this one's perfect. Because it has homicidal tendencies and they flush the memory out, and it's going to be ideal. So that's what we were doing here. So you can see that a lot of the brains kind of resisted the memory wipes. So the idea that they flush out long-term memory and short-term memory, but the brains are resisting that and fighting to hold on to their sense of self and to cling on to their identity. And it's not a big surprise because of something which is known as neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain to adapt and to rewire itself in response to learning and in the case of damage. And we will get back to that concept a bit later on. And the Robobrains that we do encounter in the wasteland have developed sort of fairly simple but violent personalities. So even though their dialogue tends to be quite polite during battle, they're usually hostile. They apologise for it, but they're still attacking you. Although there are some that have developed a more kind of complex personality, like Jezebel, who you meet in the DLC Automatron. She has a lot of opinions and quite a snarky personality. We'll hear from her a little bit later as well. So creating the Robobrains without stripping all the memories and things is also a problem, as we see in Vault 118, where the residents, they were all rich and famous people and they just wanted to live forever, and since the pioneer of the Robobrain technology was there, they just went for it, but they kept their own minds and wanted to keep their own memories and things. But over time this eventually led to some psychological issues with delusions, repetitive behaviours, disconnection from reality and distorted perception. So that whole quest is played out as a wacky murder mystery quest, and it is, but it does also indicate that there is some degree of degeneration and some changes in the brain from being in this jar for over 200 years. So when you are combining technology with organic things, it's always risky. It's always risky, because these are two things that are never really meant to be merged. They're so different to working with each other. So you're taking quite a big risk by trying to do this, that things might not work as intended. And for a lot of these brains that really didn't. Machines by nature are a product of their maker, so technical difficulties, technical problems are often user error. After all, a bug in the code, mistyped command, pressing the wrong button. An example, when I was setting up my new gaming PC for the first time and I couldn't get it to work with my TV, and it was because I was plugging the HDMI cable into the capture card instead of the graphics card. User error. And using human brains to create these obedient robots that can follow orders, it's a risk. AI can only output what's put into it. It can maybe analyse and, choose which things to output, but it can only output what's been fed into it. Human brains have the neuroplasticity that we mentioned, and that means that they learn in a very different way to machine learning models that are becoming more and more popular these days. And the reason for that is that the brain has the ability to adapt and to change its structure and the way it works, the way it's wired, based on input. So if someone suffers a brain injury, like for example a stroke or something like that, that other parts of the brain can take over for the bit that's been damaged and take over those roles, and that allows the person to recover, you know, and regain what they lost when they had the injury to the brain. How it doesn't always happen, of course, but it can, and the brain does have quite an amazing ability to do that, you know, improvise, adapt and overcome. And it also applies to learning. So muscle memory is a form of neuroplasticity. So repeating an action over and over again until your muscles remember it without conscious thought, like riding a bike, that's muscle memory, and that is a form of neuroplasticity. So is studying. So if you have an exam, you know, if you're in school, you have an exam coming up and you're revising a topic that you studied before and you're going back over it again to remind yourself, that is also the same thing, because what you're doing is reinforcing the neural pathways in your brain that retain that information, because of the way the neurons all connect to each other, and it's like a web. And the more often a neural pathway is used, the stronger it becomes and the easier it becomes. That's why if you practice something, generally speaking, you will get better at it, because you're reinforcing that pathway in your brain. So I've got an image for you. So this is a pathway like on a university campus, and the path, you know, there's a stone path that turns a corner, but people want to get where they're going a bit faster, so they cut the corner and walk across the grass. Now, one person doing that is not going to change anything, but every time somebody walks over that way, the grass gets worn down and a new path starts to form. And because once that starts, more people are going to follow that path and reinforce it. It's something that's a phenomenon that's known as a desire path, because basically people have decided they want to go that way instead of following the path that's been laid out for them. And that's how neuroplasticity works. That's how that learning and muscle memory works, because the more times you go through that path, the more of a path it becomes. And it also means that if people stop going that way and walk round, then the grass is going to grow back eventually, because, you know, use it or lose it. So there is that thing that if you stop using a skill for a prolonged period of time, then you're going to, you know, regress in your skill, and you're going to have to kind of relearn it to a degree to get back to where you were. Like again, another personal example for me, it's been now a good 3+ years since I've actually performed any surgery, because I'm not working as a vet anymore. So I don't know how I would feel about, you know, going back to doing that, because it's been such a long time. I feel like I'd be very out of practice, and it would be quite intimidating to do, because I have lost some of those skills because I've not been using them for such a long time. And I think the point really, hopefully that will make sense, because neurology is a very complicated subject. It can be ironically quite brain breaking, but what it means is that the way the human brain works, it's very, very complicated, and it has numerous systems that preserve and protect itself and maintain its function. And overcoming a lot of that, it's not quite as simple as just putting in a few lines of code. And I think the plot of Automatron highlights this all very well, because the mechanist, she wanted to protect the people of the Commonwealth, so she created these Robobrains and gave them instructions and sent them out into the world to save the people of the Commonwealth. And I think listening to Jezebel about this is probably the best way to explain what happened. So I will put in a space for Jezebel's dialogue here.
The Mechanist instructed me to seek out and help the people of the Commonwealth. By my calculations, the easiest way to help a human is simply to destroy it. There's no point in prolonging a laughably fragile life. It's the most efficient way to assist them. Any other effort to help tends to result in numerous complex side effects. Well, not exactly. The specific instruction was to help people. I merely interpreted the most efficient way to perform my duties. Assisting a human to the best of my abilities only affords a 25% survival rate. That means there's a 75% chance that despite my efforts, the human I'm assisting will die from something beyond my control. Therefore, it's better to hasten the human's death and put them out of their likely chance of misery than to deplete my limited time. It's actually quite elementary, but given your minimal intellect, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised you don't understand.
Okay, so yeah, basically they calculated the risks and the odds and concluded that since 75% of the people they saved would die anyway, the most logical and efficient way to save them and protect them is to kill them. Spare them the suffering of existence. And they're not wrong if we take the humanity out of that decision. Death is an absence of suffering, so killing humans prevents them from suffering, and it's the most efficient way to reduce human suffering. But that's extremely logical, clinical, and absolutely not how things work in real life. It's also not what Isabella Cruz intended. I don't know where she's got to. She was here. But it wasn't what her intention was with that. She wanted the robots to save people from the other horrors of the wasteland. And people do have strong will to live and self-preservation instincts. So our intentions were good, but the whole thing really highlights the problem with using brains. Human brains don't just take instructions, they interpret them. We naturally seek out the best way to approach a problem. And human brains don't want to just blindly follow orders, no matter how much programming you put into them. You can train people, you can indoctrinate them with propaganda and all the rest of it, but it's extremely difficult to fully remove a person's free will. And our brains are capable of amazing things, but they don't really like to be controlled by outside forces of any kind. And it's the same thing that we see with the Gen 3 synths. And they do have brains that are at least in part organic, because they do have a nervous system. It's synthetic, but it's still a nervous system. And if they could be completely controlled and programmed to do the Institute's will without question, they would never try and escape, and the SRB and the railroad wouldn't exist. So it just kind of shows that when you have a human brain, humans are going to human. It's the way these things work. So it's something that maybe wasn't really accounted for in this whole endeavour when they were creating these robots. And they do turn up in various places, so they do feature in all the games, really, all the mainline games anyway that we have. So you find them in the Glow and Fallout, which was what used to be the West Tech research facility. You also find them in the Sierra Army Depot in Fallout 2. And you find them in Fallout 3. You often stumble into them wandering the wastes, actually, in Fallout 3 more than anywhere else, interestingly. But you do also find them in some military facilities, abandoned buildings. We know Vault-Tec also had access to the technology, because you find them in Vault 112, so Dr. Braun obviously got his hands on some to manage the vault while he was in his simulation, making people's lives miserable for eternity. And you also find them in the Vault-Tec headquarters, including the unique one that's in charge of security at Vault-Tec headquarters, the Master Brain. They're quite rare in Fallout New Vegas, but you can find them inside Helios 1. You can also find them in the Death Chamber in Vault 111 and in H&H Tools Factory. And you can even make one yourself in Old World Blues in X8 by combining a lobotomite and a robot. There's also a unique one which is called the Super Ego that lives near Higgs Village. And the superego, if you don't know, is the aspect of personality that controls morality, according to Sigmund Freud's theory of the aspects of the psyche. And in Fallout 4, the Robobrains weren't in the base game. They don't turn up at all. It's only in Automatron, the DLC, that they are added. That was kind of spooky there, just that bottle of quantum glowing in the dark. Okay, so here we are at the brain extraction terminal, which is in the cerebral reconditioning room because they switched them around. But the Robobrain never fully entered mass production for a few reasons. As far as I can tell, shortage of prisoners to harvest brains from isn't one of them. But the brain extraction equipment really struggled to cope with the high demand and running 24/7, which we see in this entry here. So equipment failures were getting pretty backed up. The brain extractors were never made to operate at this capacity. I think they've been running around the clock for the last few weeks. We usually end up with a popped blade from slicing through a particularly tough skull, or the hydraulics in the pulling arm seize up when the spinal cord isn't fully severed and the brain is pulled too early. I hope that Cerulete doesn't yell at us again. This really isn't our fault. So the machines are basically running 24/7 and they're having problems with parts breaking down and things like that. And the source of this actually is probably from the military that are in charge of running the show. Putting a lot of pressure on them to keep churning out these Robobrains as much as possible and as quickly as possible. Okay, finally found the production control terminal. This place is pretty huge, but this is where the guy in charge from the army was based. So got transferred over here, and the General Atomics employee got pulled because he let the efficiency drop to below 90%. And yeah, he's not happy, so he's going to get it back on track and show how the US military runs the show. And he basically got rid of all the General Atomics people, thinking that they were lazy, thinking that they were, just losing paperwork, dropping supplies, all kinds of nonsense. And yeah, he caught one of the General Atomics people hooking them up, the Robobrains, to talk to them and asking it how it was feeling, and he fired her on the spot. How they get anything done without discipline. So he's just like, this is nonsense, this is too inefficient. And he's got them back to 100% efficiency, so it's all soldiers and the work's getting done on budget, on time and without mistakes. This is how you run a damn assembly line. So yeah, basically there was a lot of pressure put on the employees here to get these robots churned out as quick as possible. He wanted to see the mass production, even though, there was a lot of issues with the brain extraction and things happening that, weren't really kind of working very well. And as we see, these Robobrains, without orders, without anybody telling them what to do, they start kind of thinking for themselves, and then they start becoming aggressive and hostile to people, which was presumably not the true intention, but it's kind of the way it happened. And obviously we've got to think about there being some moral and ethical questions about creating robots using human brains, because you're sourcing brains that are suitable. If brains of people that have PTSD are not suitable, if brains of people that have kind of suffered or are at risk for developing things like dementia and any other kind of neurodegenerative conditions aren't suitable. It's finding people, and you obviously need to make sure that they stay alive until you can get the brain into the biogel and all that kind of thing. So it's not something that's really, sort of simple and easy. And you know, it seems like from the various notes and things that potentially upwards of 60% of the brains were not usable and not suitable. And of course, when you remove the brain, you're killing the person. There's no kind of way of sugarcoating that. That's what you're doing. I mean, you want them to survive the process of extraction of the brain, but after that, they're brain dead, which is death. You know, even if you can keep the heart beating, keep the lungs breathing, it's still dead. It's still death. So, you know, artificial life support doesn't kind of take that away, that if the brain's not there, then the person's dead. So, but interestingly, it doesn't really seem like the researchers here cared that much that they were systematically murdering people in order to build robots. So if you look at the brain extraction terminal entries, you know, they're having a great time making cocktails from the biogel, using some grenadine and vodka to make an extractor sunrise. And apparently it was quite tasty. Which is fine, but when it costs $1,000 a pint, it's probably not, you know. But you know, this is the thing. They're drinking, they're making cocktails with their biogel, and tricking colleagues into eating brains. I'm sorry, but if these people never heard of Kuru or any prion diseases, because this is how you get prion diseases. This is how the zombie apocalypse starts. I'm not actually kidding either. I learned about prion diseases at vet school, and they are horrifying and terrifying. So, BSE, what people know as mad cow disease, scrapie in sheep, chronic wasting disease in deer, are all other examples. And their prions are misfolded proteins that turn the brain into a sponge. So BSE stands for bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Spongiform means it looks like a sponge, so there's holes in it. That's what that means. And encephalopathy is a disease of the encephalon, which is the brain. So that's what that means. And these proteins are infectious, and they survive most normal disinfection procedures. So let's not let's not do that. That's a silly idea. But this is the kind of thing, you know, they're literally taking brains out of people. And okay, the people were, you know, murderers and whatever, so not very nice people by all accounts, but you know, they're just like, yeah, this is hilarious, we're just going to pretend this is a cake, but it's actually a brain. And yeah, no thanks. So don't do that. Don't do that. That's bad. Although, yeah, there is one person that kind of feels like maybe this is a bit wrong, because he's having to basically incinerate or cremate all the remains after the brains have been extracted. And like, he got asked if it ever bothered him, and he's like, yeah, not really. Maybe they should go and find another job, kind of thing. So it, you know, it's a very kind of, it's a very strange attitude to take to the fact that, you know, that like innovation is tantamount to anything. So yeah, lesson learned: don't eat the brains, whether they're from a human or from a robobrain. Just don't eat brains; it's never going to go well. Is the lesson from that. So the final thing to talk about with regards to the robobrains is their combat capabilities. So from a gameplay point of view, in most of the games, I would consider them kind of mid-tier in terms of difficulty and danger. Sentry bots are kind of higher tier to my experience. So the chassis is quite durable. It's quite tough, and they tend to have good accuracy for both their lasers and their melee weapons. If they're holding weapons, they're quite accurate with them, particularly seen in Fallout 2. And the high level ones like the quantum ones in Fallout 4 are also pretty dangerous. Interestingly, the head is the weak spot, which is kind of, this is quite a low level one, so it's not really going to show you that. But the head is actually the weak spot, which is unusual. Most other robots in Fallout 4, the head's actually reinforced, and it's often the body or some other part that's the kind of weak spot to target. But that makes sense for the Robobrain because that's the CPU, which is organic rather than electronic. And if you damage the glass, or even if you were to rattle the head hard enough, potentially that could cause damage to the brain, same as it does in, human heads. The brain, that's kind of what happens with like concussions and things like that. But the key thing with the Robobrains is a lot of them have a built-in mesmatron. So if you've played Fallout 3 and you've done the quests for the slavers at Evergreen Mills, they give you the mesmatron, which is a thing that basically allows you to kind of sedate people so that you can put bomb collars on them to send them off to be slaves, but sometimes it has unusual effects. So if you get hit with the mesmatron from the Robobrain, that's kind of the real danger from these robots. It's easy to avoid if you see it coming because it's kind of slow moving and you see it as like a kind of wibbly circle in the air coming towards you. But if it hits you, it cripples your head, and that causes you to get that blurred vision effect, hindered accuracy, and you lose perception. And there is a similar effect to that in Fallout 4 as well, and the blurry vision can make it harder to shoot back, which is something certainly when that happens in the game, the blurry vision, it really gets to me. I struggle with it as well, but that's kind of what it's supposed to do. So, that it kind of damages your ability to see, but you can see they've got the treads and then they've got these arms. This one has a Tesla rifle attachment. Interestingly, I just kind of spawned this one in my console commands just to we could get a chat about that. And they're really quite a unique kind of robot, but their existence obviously raises a lot of questions, particularly in terms of morals and ethics. Not unlike the discussions around performing brain transplants, because where in the body is the essence of who you are as a person? It's in your brain. It's your memories, your experiences that inform your personality. Your brain is how we perceive and understand the world around us. It's where we make decisions, imagination, creativity, emotions, connections with other people. It's all in the brain. So if you take all that away, what's left? So I think it's something to think about. And I do apologise if anyone finds themselves having a bit of an existential crisis after this. If you try to imagine, what it would feel like to wake up and not feel any sensory input from the body. I find that really hard to imagine. And as some of you guys might remember, I do suffer from chronic pain. I have a number of things going on with my health. It means that, every single day I'm in some degree of pain. Some days are better than others, but there's always pain from somewhere. And I also have something that's called paresthesia, which is sort of something specifically with the nervous system. So that feeling if you hit your elbow, your funny bone as they call it, and you get that kind of tingling in your arm when you hit your elbow. So I basically have that constantly in both arms or both legs, and it feels like it can feel like electric shocks sometimes, but there's always that kind of prickling and burning, sort of pins and needles sensation, and it's just there constantly. I'm under the care of Neurology, so it is being investigated, and I actually got a call yesterday, so I'm going on Monday to get an MRI scan, so we'll see if my brain's still there. That's what we're going to find out. So I'm getting an MRI scan on Monday, and I'm under the care of Neurology to investigate it. So it just really, I think waking up in the body of a Robobrain to me is kind of like if I was to wake up in the morning and not have any pain, and it would just be so weird. And sometimes when I think about, if you think too hard about this and what that would be like, it kind of makes you feel a bit funny, a little bit of a kind of body horror almost sense when you think about the Robobrains, how they were created, and what was done. Why can't I move? it's getting stuck on the gurney. It does kind of, it's a weird thing to think about, I think. Because brains are just the way the brain works and everything. There's still a lot we don't really know about it as well. It's not like we know everything about every single part of the brain and every single function. That's still, we're still learning more and more about it every day. But the way it works, and that's why you can't really think of it as just being like a CPU of a computer or a system like that, because it works so differently. And while there is artificial intelligence, it's becoming more commonplace. In some cases I think it's going to be a real detriment to society rather than a benefit, while there are other aspects where I could see it being beneficial. But attempting to replicate the way the human brain works is not it's not something that's going to be very easy, because it is organic. It works in a very different way, and the way we learn and the way we perceive the world and things, it's not something that's going to be easy to replicate in real life. And I'm not sure how much we should try to do that either. That's kind of the issue. But it does bring about a bit of a sense of body horror. But I think the Robobrains are really interesting. I don't really recall seeing much like it in any other kind of sci-fi kind of media that I'm aware of. There probably is similar things out there, but not something that I know too much about. So I think they're really interesting. I still remember how confused I was the first time I ever saw one in Fallout 3. Because I was just like, wait a minute, what do you mean this robot's got an actual human brain in it? And then in the Fallout 4 ones, they do get an eye. But that looks mechanical. It's not an actual eye. But the eyes are very closely connected to the brain as well. They are the sense organs that are just about nearest to the brain. But yeah, it's very interesting, and just seeing how it would actually work. And that and the thing is that this place has obviously been long abandoned until the Mechanist came along, and we've still got brains sitting in jars bubbling away. So they just the sheer number of people who they've taken brains out of to make these robots. And then it's not even just like, they're not just making actual Robobrains, but the gurneys have all got brains in them. And then there's that Roombo brain that I call it, from the TV show Bud Askins, the Vault-Tec executive who put his brain into a Roomba for some reason. I don't know why he did a Roomba and not like an actual Robobrain. That seems kind of wacky to me. I wonder if we'll find out more about what he did and why he did it in the next season. But it's very, very interesting. And then we've got, I don't really know what happened here, because there's a big explosion on that back plate of this machine. I'm not really sure if it's some kind of surgery thing. We do have x-ray should know the word for that, light box. So yeah, definitely one of the most interesting robots, because it's an amalgamation of both organic and mechanical. And like a lot of things in Fallout, it does bring up some interesting moral and ethical questions. And the fact that the people working here didn't really seem to care that much, that they were literally killing people to take out their brains to turn them into robots, and then they wipe their memories and things. It's kind of bonkers. But it does also really highlight the potential for things to go wrong. Because these Robobrains that interpret orders and then try and find what they think is the most logical way of approaching a problem instead of just doing what they're told. And I think that really is highlighted in the story of Automatron. So yeah, really interesting one. But as always, I love to hear what you think. Do you think there would be anybody that would be willing to volunteer for this kind of thing? I don't see it But obviously a lot of people were volunteered against their will, as we can see just by the number of brains that are kicking about. And you know, obviously going through quite a lot, because you've got all these that are like mortuary drawers almost at the incinerator, and you know, a big pile of ash with some bones and things. So, you know, because you take the brain out, but you still have to deal with the rest of the body, so it obviously all had to go and get incinerated and things like that. It's just a horrible thing when you really think about it. But I say, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.